this episode features two men that have a lot of insight and knowledge to share. One of them being Kipper Eldridge out of the UK, runs a very successful production and music studio, and shares insights very honestly and authentically about his journey of being a conscious, evolved man, and maybe even hopping on that train a little later than he hoped. But he is such a shining beacon of authenticity. Loved the way he showed up in this episode. And Justin Faerman, who my favorite moment was, we asked him about authenticity, and Justin is like, that just reminds me of Yoda. Like, don't try, just do. If you're trying to be authentic, you already missed the boat. That was my favorite part.
Yeah, and this one was a funny one. There was a lot of laughter. Kipper, you can't help but be in a space with Kipper, who has worked with some of the top performers, musicians around the world, as a producer, but also as this deeply soulful, he's a therapist. And so he weaves that in with humor, with skill, and he did that in this conversation. And I think Justin really appreciated it and responded well, with both a sense of Justin has a lot of gravitas in a very quiet, calm, Yoda-like way. And he and Kipper were really great banter partners with us in between. I laughed through this one a lot. It had a huge, big grin on my face.
Definitely an episode I remember for its humor. The interesting thing about Kipper for me was that he said a few really intelligent things on this episode, but it was more his energy and the way he was holding space that I remember from this episode, because I think he was kind of that very vital ingredient to get a lot of depth out of Justin. And so together, it was just quite interesting to see that dance between two men.
We are breaking the rules of business as usual. Join this exclusive Alter Braintrust series with Hope and Julian. I want to dive right in, Kipper and Justin, and ask you, or first, I'm going to make a statement that we are all originals in our own way. How do you both stand out as originals in your life, professionally and personally?
Good question. I'll go first then. As I get older, I look back and see it sort of in retrospect, because I'm always kind of I don't want to be too kind of like, hey, I'm this guy that does this or does that, and sort of have some sales pitch about who or what I am. But the thing that you hinted at when we first chatted today, it was that the thing I really, I'm a musician, I make records, I work with well-known and not so well-known artists. But the thing I think in life that I really do naturally is kind of make people smile and smile myself. And it's kind of, sometimes I pretend that I'm a sad person inside that's just trying to kind of cover it up. But I am genuinely, I really enjoy, I've always really enjoyed being alive and working with people. I love people. And so for all of the stuff that we might talk about that's technical and that's, I do talks to students at Abbey Road Studios, for instance, I did last week, and I'm telling them, about what microphone you might use or what program I use. But really, I think I create a really fun, safe environment for people to be themselves. And so if I was going to pick one thing, it would be sort of using my natural humor and my love of people to create a kind of lovely environment for people to then be themselves.
You definitely do. And it's reverberating over the waves, Kipper. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, so I kind of heard that question, if I'm remembering it correctly, is how are you different and break the rules? Is that kind of the essence of it?
You're original, Justin, in your own way. How do you stand out? Yeah.
That's a hard question to answer, but I guess what's coming to me to answer that is that even from when I was super young, I just, things didn't add up. the world as it was presented to me by my parents, culture, et cetera, just didn't add up to me. So, and I was pretty young, maybe like 5 or 6, and I was like, what is this place? Um, and so that sent me on this journey just to like question everything, literally to question everything, take nothing for granted, ask why until you arrive at something that feels real to you. And so I've been driven by that my whole life to this very day. And so it's led me down some really interesting paths. And I'm kind of a mutt in terms of what I've done with my life. Kipper and all of us were talking beforehand. At one point, I was a musician. I thought I was going to go to grad school for music, and then I got a degree in environmental science, and I also studied sound engineering, and then I made documentaries, and then I worked as the director of marketing for a compostable packaging company, and then I started an institute around personal development and consciousness. And so I've just kind of been all over the map in that inquiry, always kind of just searching for some semblance of truth or what's real. And so I think that's kind of the essence of who I am, and I guess what's original about me.
Well,
Nice.
I'm curious, and being original, Julian, you probably feel into this as well because you are definitely an original. Is how do we stay authentically original and not? I mean, sometimes one can go hard on like, okay, I'm an original, and maybe take it to that next level where you're trying really hard to stand out and be original. How do you how do you maintain or feel into your authentic original self?
I love that question. I love it because the first thing that sparks in my mind, I go to, the opposite direction of this, which is Adidas original. You know that brand name that Adidas brought out. It's like how fucked is the world that this is what we lead marketing for really large companies is like be an original, wear another hat like everyone else. And I think it's this is that's kind of like what's wrong with this aspect of the world in a certain way. And I think sometimes we need to know what we don't want to understand what we want or who we really are. And I think it has a lot to do with that is understanding, can I be original, not from comparing myself with everything else I've seen out there, the advertisement, the last music video, the whatever it might be. But does it come from an original impulse inside myself? Does this come from an impulse that's with me when I'm alone in nature, that comes with me when I'm alone in silence somewhere, right? Like, is that the tune that I'm humming when I'm alone, when no one's listening? I think for me, that's a really big start. You both said you're musicians, Justin and Kipper. How do you take that metaphor of like the sound wave that's traveling through you is kind of the origination of your way of authentically being original? Do you resonate with that?
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty. Yeah, you go, Justin.
Okay, I think I was first there. I mean, I'm just reminded of Yoda saying, "Do not try, do," and it's like if you're trying to be original or authentic, I think you've missed the boat. It's when you're not trying to do those things, right? And you're just being who you are without concern whether it's original or authentic, that you actually end up being that. So it's a bit of kind of like a paradox. And yeah, so I think it's more of like a stripping away of like all these ideas and trying this or that or trying to fit into some idea or mold, and really just discovering who you really are through process of being and self-inquiry.
Yeah, I like that. I think I had a couple of thoughts as you were talking, because I think my first thought was based on me answering without kind of creating the space for other people in a production way. But then there is sometimes those moments when you then play the role of the guy that creates a safe space, because that's the job, and I might not on a particular day be that excited about recording a trumpet on another version of My Funny Valentine. It might not be like, oh wow, oh, that's great, yeah, that's it might just be like, okay, so I really want the guy to be okay, and I've got to play the role of making that. I know professionally what's the right thing to do, but I might not be always going, here I am doing the real me safe space. I might have to play at that. But I think creatively, exactly what Justin said is, I think that I'm aware of making time and waiting for those moments of kind of true connection, which then you interpret when you're not trying, exactly as you said. And sometimes you have to sit around talking if you're writing songs, and just not have an expectation and not have an attachment to we've got to get the song. And lots of people in Nashville will write a song. They'll write 4 songs in a day. They'll write a song before coffee break, and it's a different approach. But I guess for me, the real great artists and the real great creative moments are in the spaces when you know, and maybe for a lot of artists when they're taking drugs and they're completely spaced out and they're not here, it allows them the space to kind of let in the mystic.
Ooh, the mystic. Well, following the trail of both of you being musicians or having a strong thrum of music creatively in your lives, I wonder, when was the moment that you both realized, you slipped into a flow, feeling like music was a place that was so authentically, genuinely you? Were you really young? Was it not that long ago? Like, tell us when did that spark light?
I mean, there's so many answers. I don't know if there is an answer. There's the moment. I think I recognize different things at different times. I was 7 when my dad gave me a guitar and showed me "Sunshine of Your Love" by Jimi Hendrix, and so that, you know, that looks quite good on the bio when you say I was given a guitar at 7 and I kind of got it. But I don't know whether I just was infatuated with my dad, and it was a really lovely Christmas Day morning, and it was kind of, that was exciting. I think because of the stage, I mean, I'm 61 years old. I think I do see it all now retrospectively, and I think that they're all fantastic moments that I was really unaware of at the time, and the journey of making music and being with wonderful friends and musicians and artists. I'm so grateful for the journey. And at the time, I think I was just following my nose, doing my best, and occasionally touching the other. And maybe those are the moments that then lead you on to do other things. Maybe, you know, I think those really authentic connection moments. But there'd also be lots of moments when I'm sort of, you know, learning a song so that I can try and attract a girl in a pub on a Wednesday night. And I learn to play a song that I might then play years later and use those chords in another song. But there was lots of kind of normal everyday living that when I look back, it was a joyful experience of being the authentic me, you know, day to day.
I love that, touching the light. You reaching, and does any of that resonate with you, Justin? You have your own experiences, journey.
Yeah. I mean, I never ended up in really any kind of career around music. It's always been just kind of like this parallel track to my life. At one point I started to pursue it, and I thought that, oh yeah, I might go into that and, you know, do production or sound design or something. And I performed like some songs I wrote and stuff a few times, but it never really took on a professional tilt for me. So in that sense, it's always been kind of like a pure creative space, and a really beautiful way to, I think, interface and access what you asked in your question. And so for me, when I'm playing music, it's like a point of like pure creativity. There's no goal. There's nothing that I get out of it other than pure enjoyment and expression. So
Amazing.
it's a nice way for me to just shift into that if I need it, if I have an instrument around. So.
I second that personally. I love that you're saying that, Justin. You know, with music not being a career, but being a full expression, there's like the original intention of music, right? Which is just, I feel like, yeah, I don't know, maybe stuck wherever I was stuck before, or I feel in a rut, and let me pick up that instrument. Let me start playing that drum or that guitar, whatever it is. And 10, 15 minutes later, like my entire being is at a different place. And you know, maybe that changes in the professional context of music. Kipper, you probably have a lot of stories to share about how how people just emulate, kind of copy paste what they think will make them successful rather than, actually just bringing out that creative expression. But before we go there, Hope, I'd love to know from you, because you've been asking the questions so far. How is that process for you? Bringing out, knowing you're an original, interfacing with the music of your own soul.
Well, I'm going to be totally honest, as I am, and listening to you three talk about reaching for a musical instrument or having a strong thread of music in your life. It hasn't been my expressive tool or kind of the divining rod for me. And sometimes I have a bit of FOMO. And to be really honest, I know Julian and Kipper, who's a dear friend, have encouraged me to explore at any age, to tap into that. When I think about being an original, for me, it is really doing my best to remove masks and shine a lot of love out into the world. From a really young age, I started to feel like maybe I had kind of a overload of it, and like a heaping portion that just was kind of coming out all over the place, spilling out. And I used to apologize for it. I used to kind of make it smaller, dim the light. And the older I get, the more I am not putting the governor on the big barrel of love that I was fortunate enough to be gifted. And it's not to say that I don't go through ups and downs, for sure, but I think it's really feeling into this source of self-love, of connection, and to let it flow. And if it's too much for people, or people are other people have an issue with that, I let them have an issue with it, and I continue letting it come out in all different ways. So yeah, feeling into my name, Hope, and letting the love shine out is my way. Yeah.
Do you both have can you relate with that? This feeling of maybe there was a governor on a certain quality of yours, or like the way you would handle yourself when people are around, and at that moment in time where you're like, well, screw this. This is my life, and this is what I have to give. Can you relate to that at all? Because I know I
Yeah,
can. That's why I'm asking.
I can definitely relate to it. That's been like a defining theme in my life, to be totally honest. And, one that I've made tremendous progress on, but I'm still, there's still more to go. But yeah, it was really, I definitely shut down my self-expression for a long time, because as a kid, when I would share how I really felt or what I thought about things, it was often met with resistance, or feedback, or you're wrong, or I got in trouble. And, it's very difficult. And so I just kind of learned that, life was easier if I didn't say what I really thought, and I kind of just held that within. And so it's, I did that for a long time. And, once I finally got on the spiritual path and began to do more healing and personal development work, that started to erode it. Obviously, I became aware that I was even doing it. I wasn't even aware that I was doing it for a long time. And that started to erode it. But I think, that's the quintessential journey. It's like the journey of truly coming into fullest self-expression, regardless of what other people think. And, music provides a nice container to do that at times, but I still think people can hide in that. I think it's really, this is a spiritual journey, a journey of like healing and self-discovery ultimately. And, and I admire the people that have gone, through that, and really found that authentic self-expression, which I think is pretty rare, to be totally honest. So
You can see it in
I'm,
kids.
I'm
Yeah.
going to talk about myself in a minute, but there's just one story that came up for me when we were on this subject. It was Kate Bush, the artist, who stopped making records for about 12, 13 years. And she said, how can I make a Kate Bush record when I'm so aware of what everybody expects a Kate Bush record to be? I no longer am able to authentically sit and create, because I'm aware that 6 million people are going to go and buy my record and it's going to be reviewed by everybody. Whereas when she was Kate Bush, the 19-year-old singer discovered by Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, she was just being the crazy girl with the high voice singing about Wuthering Heights. And she wasn't thinking, and a little bit like you're saying, Justin, you can just reach for the guitar and you're playing without any thought about what that is. If all of a sudden what you played today went viral and you had, 1 billion streams, the next time you picked up your guitar, you'd have to deal with, fucking hell, that was so easy. And I just there, but what do I follow that with? And that's then the challenge of the artist growing.
I love where you just took it, Kipper. I really love this. I think this is very real with the example of the musician, and Kate Bush is a great example for the story where this became very real for an individual. But I think it's actually real for all of us, as we onboard into experiencing ourselves on a conscious journey, or as Justin just called it, a spiritual journey. We realize, oh wow, there's more to life than just eating sandwiches and watching TV shows, right? And then a little later in the journey, we realize, okay, what we do, there's consequences and it affects other people. And so you grow self-conscious about your consciousness, right? And that happens to all of us at some point in the journey. Now, the question though is, because I'm self-conscious of how conscious I am I going to cater my message to you because I know it would make you feel better? Or am I fundamentally following my values and my principles and I'm honest and real? But sometimes it burns and sometimes it hurts. And sometimes, even though you might not like that, you got to taste that medicine. And now, given that we're not actually out there to hurt someone, I think that this is a fundamental challenge in this world right now, where censorship is at an all-time high again. And like, we don't want people to censor it themselves, right? Because the more real I am, the more real you are, the more honest we are, the more we are okay with carrying the weight of being conscious of our self-consciousness. Suddenly there's a breakthrough. Suddenly there's a social breakthrough where it's just like, oh wow, Justin was just really Justin. I like that, right? Personally, maybe it hurt me for a moment, but there's this click. And I think we all know what I'm talking about here, but I think people shy away from that. That's something people like lean out and, oh no, I'd rather say sorry and like, let me cater to you because being myself here is going to get me in trouble. But that's breaking the rules, isn't it?
It is.
I like that, yeah.
And I would say, Kipper, and I would love to hear how this lands for you, Justin, but knowing your work, Kipper, as a producer, as also a therapist, you can share more light on what that psychotherapy angle is, but you support people to elucidate or bring to life those walls, right? That is part of the work that you're doing, is to get closer to these walls. Could you tell us a bit about your work in Studio Without Walls, or even how you come up against walls for yourself and people you work with?
I suppose it's quite interesting because what Julian's just said, it's interesting to explore, because what that all of a sudden does is that brings me answering in a kind of, I suppose, with my elevator pitch, maybe, of what Studio Without Walls is. And then I can talk about what I've learned in order to teach people. But aside from that, there's just me as a individual human being on my spiritual conscious journey. And I thought it was brilliant what you said. And I'll be doing whatever I do that kind of helps me, helps other people, earns a living. But I think my journey has been almost in reverse to what Justin said for him, is that I think I grew up with very loving, overly indulgent parents, which was wonderful. And I've no slagging off of my parents in any way, but I was kind of like, I was an only child till I was 13 and a half. I had all of the attention. And I think up until I was probably in my mid-30s, I think I thought I was it. I think I thought, which is a great confident thing, but I thought the world kind of sort of revolved around me, irrespective of any success. It wasn't really to do with, I had a signed band that didn't become successful, and I had songs that didn't become hits. So it wasn't like the world revolved around me because I'd made loads of cash. It was just like I had this real amazing confidence instilled by them. And this is a very funny little mundane story, but I was in the post office in England posting a parcel, and I just spoke to this lady, I said something funny. I was being like like I can be, and I sort of said something, and she wasn't interested in what I had to say. And it was, even though this was a small little moment, it was this like, oh my God. I might have said, God, there's a big queue here, and it'd be good if we could just jump the queue and you could go there or something. And she looked at me like, what are you fucking talking about? And for me, this was a moment of like, oh my God, not everything I do is really great, and I don't have to be that guy, because I think I would always be the guy that would elicit the nice response that means that everyone's smiling, and then I'm a good guy because I've made them laugh. And so my journey is almost re-engineering that, not to not be that person, but to not feel like I have to be that person. So I don't have to be the funny guy. I don't have to be the guy that's got all the answers. I don't have to be the person that knows. But sometimes I am funny, and sometimes I do know. And I think, like you're saying, Julian, they're the times to show up and do it. And so I'm really learning to know when to really show up and go, this isn't acceptable. And other times when it's just cool to just not say anything. And I do love that saying, once a wise man said nothing. It really has that feeling of like, let's see what happens and play your part when you need to, and take your ego out and love people, and don't just allow people to, tell someone if they're boring you when they just keep talking on and on about something. Because we're all there, aren't we? And I'm going to say, with lots of men that might be telling me all of the facts that they know about something. And I'm thinking, I'm not interested in the football league. Why are you telling me all of this in the pub? And sometimes I'll say, why don't we change the subject? And sometimes I will stand there with my pint thinking, this is so boring. And I've got to learn to show up better in those situations, as mundane as they are.
Showing up. Yeah.
Showing up, yeah, and being as true and authentic in those moments. So that's why I think the Studio Without Walls thing, only in this moment then, it felt a bit like I was going to show up and go, I'm hoping for people that aren't musicians to come into the studio environments and to touch their inner creative self and to see how by letting go you can connect. It's sort of like, and I do mean all that, but I didn't quite feel it was the right time to say it.
I love that we're already kind of breaking the rules. Hope is the co-host of the show asking a question, and you're like, no, I'm gonna go with what's real right here, which is totally, in a certain way, breaking the rules, right?
Right.
You'll give us that elevator pitch, because I know it also really relates to, Justin, one of your current positive obsessions about like mapping out the human psyche and the subconscious, and helping people understand themselves and their process of becoming conscious, so that they can bring more of that into the world. So I think we have a lot to explore there together.
Yeah, is that a prompt for me to talk about?
Either way, I mean, I kind of wanted to hear Kipper's elevator pitch one more time with all the energy he's got. Yeah.
Go, Kipper.
Yeah. Well, I suppose my elevator pitch is that I have. I've realized that through my kind of 40 plus years of showing up, practicing music every day in whatever form that is, sitting with a blank canvas with no particular work for a year and wondering what I'm doing, and never having an opportunity to do something outside of music, because I kind of had committed myself that this was how I was going to live from a very young age. And what I've seen is that it's a complete spiritual practice. Using all the words that can take us in different directions, but music is my religion. And I would never have said anything like that, and I may have even thought that was pretentious when I was younger. But when I see my friends, and it's great being back in England, meeting friends that I've known for 35 years. I met someone on Friday. I worked this amazing double bass player, and everybody in my circle of musical friends, they're all so much younger than other 60-year-olds. They have a kind of different energy. I feel there's an instant connection, even though this guy, Steve Walters, I hadn't seen for about 19 years. And it was like we just were back together. And we weren't like best friends, but we toured a lot. We've made recordings. I got my Sting opportunity, and at the same time he started to work with George Michael, so we went off in our different directions from playing with all these unsigned bands. And and I suppose seeing him on Friday, it was like really seeing a real brother who, whilst I don't really know what his day-to-day's been, he's been playing the bass for the last 19 years, and he's been doing touring, and he's been doing the same thing as I've been doing. And I suppose I'm really grateful for that. And I think what I see with a lot, and this is very sort of angled at men, if I was honest, is that having done I did a psychotherapy degree, which when I did it was to help me with my production and giving me some actual skills on how to deal with people. The thing that I've noticed is how tough it can be for men to connect with themselves and to connect with the other. I'm going to call it the other, whatever, their higher self, their spiritual self, and probably this is to do with men. I would say for me, I'm seeing it in some of my friends from 45 plus, and I just feel, and I really feel for them, because I feel so lucky that I've had this release and this connection, even though I wasn't aware that what was happening. It kind of eroded some of my kind of macho need to be the strongest, or to be all knowing, or to supposedly show up and have all the answers for the family, or be the breadwinner. And I see, and there's a couple of men in particular that I love in Bali that have this challenge. And so that's what inspired the idea of Studio Without Walls, was like, and there's this one man in particular, if I could get him into an environment where, not in order to say, why don't you come in and we're going to work on some mental health and some connecting you to anything, because he wouldn't come. And in fact, he said he's not going to come still at the moment. He's like, I wouldn't go into the studio for a day. Oh God, yeah, that's too long for me, that. But the idea that they might experience the sort of the love and the freedom, and I could sound like a kind of born again Christian, but the love and the freedom that in the studio, when people aren't being egoic about, oh, he's a better player than me, or the fear of it, and the creative energy of that studio time of writing a song. I suppose my hope would be that it might spark something in men's minds. And I always talk about Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, going into doing exactly this with Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters. So you've got this kind of hugely privileged middle-class man who's running our country to go in with a kind of self-made musician. And could Dave Grohl, and of course Rishi Sunak would do it because it's a cool thing to go and hang out with Dave Grohl for a couple of hours. But could it change the way that he thinks when he's deciding on how he's going to run the NHS, or how he's going to deal with other human beings? Could he see a different way of being? And so I'm, in my own way, I'm kind of thinking that to start small with people, maybe in my community, but and I don't like any of the words music therapy or retreat or workshop. There's something I want to somehow just go, just come and hang out. Julian, if you're in Bali, come and hang out in the studio. Let's have a chat. I mean, that's kind of all it really is at its simplest form. So that's me taking off the walls of the studio. You're all welcome.
We're all welcome. We're all coming. And I wonder, thanks, Kipper, for you, Justin, and your work. What Julian introduced a little bit. I don't know your work well. It would be wonderful to hear more about the threads of supporting others, but how your own journey has informed that.
Yeah. Thanks for that nice setup. Yeah. So, picking up the thread from, what I explained about my childhood and seeking, to understand like reality, basically, because I think this is a pretty crazy place that we get dropped into, to be totally honest. And so that inquiry led me to what I felt like were good answers. And the good answers for me is that, as far as I could tell, most of the problems that we had came back to us. There was something going on like in our minds and our emotions and our consciousness that was driving our behavior. And then through a series of, decisions and actions and intermediate steps, resulted in this experience of, our culture, society, each other, reality. And so I saw consciousness was really at the root, or what goes on in our minds and goes on internally for us is really at the root of both our challenges and also the beautiful things that we've created. And if we could just optimize that, this was the highest leverage thing that we had ultimately. And so that I had these realizations, and that started to blossom as I got more deep into personal development and the spiritual path and whatnot. And then I became entrepreneurial. I kind of got my not fitting into the boxes really well. I only had one corporate job basically, and it was great. It was like the least corporate job you could possibly have. I had zero oversight and was basically given free reign to do what I wanted, and it was really successful at it too. But then I was like, why am I doing this for other people? I could be doing this for myself, and be putting all of my creative energy and intention and desire behind what I felt was most important instead of somebody else's agenda, as good as it was. So I got an entrepreneurial bent in me, and then that immediately took me into, well, okay, what's the most impactful way? How can we shift consciousness at scale, essentially? And the first couple ways that took shape were through media platforms where I was publishing different, information and articles and writing different things around consciousness and working with different, um, experts or teachers or luminaries or whatever, researchers and whatnot. Just anybody who had, I thought, some kind of meaningful way to do inner or tangential outer work to like shift things positively. And then that eventually kept going alongside my own personal experiences and research, after 10 or 11 years. And I started an institute called the Flow Consciousness Institute with my good friend and business partner, Jackie Nechtel. And that was like where I finally got to really, put all my weight behind doing this kind of work, and actually like in the weeds, doing deep research into, transformation, healing, consciousness, human potential, how the mind works, et cetera, and actually turning that into trainings and helping people do that with the best tools in the world that we could find and whatever we developed in house through our own research. And I we did started that about 2015, 2016. So it's been going on for 8 or 9 years. And then in the last 5 years, I, I was doing some incredibly deep inner work, which has been my focus for a long time. And I've been very passionate about that and published original research on that level and all these things. And so I was going super deep into territory that I really hadn't seen or heard anybody talked about. And I've really been around the bush and the block and tried so many different things and studied so many different things. And um, I thought it was super interesting. So I started to document everything. I just said, my intuition just said, just document this in detail. So I started granularly documenting every single thing I experienced inside of me. So I'd be doing super deep inner work for hours, and like every 5 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, I would pause and just scribble down notes, of what I was encountering, and doing this very granularly. And, after 6 months or a year, very clear patterns started to emerge from that data. And like I would regularly encounter certain things at certain levels of depth, and like that fear would always show up there, and then that belief would always show up there. And so I started to just take note of this, and I started to discover some original things about the way that the psyche was structured just through my own work. And in parallel, like because of the work that I do with the Institute and with my private clients, I'm also facilitating this kind of work for other people. And so I had the ability to kind of see if these were isolated things within me or if they were occurring for other people as well. And so this kept going for a few years, and out of it I started to develop this map of the human subconscious, basically, because I knew I could start to tell reliably that that was definitely explained like pretty much all of human behavior. And so that was probably real, and it kept showing up for me. And I just kept building and taking notes and stacking all of these things. And eventually, after a number of years of working on myself and getting a lot of data from all the people that I was working with, I had a very accurate map of the human psyche that was so accurate that I could actually predict what people were going to encounter next and say next. And it took everything I'd been doing previously with the flow work and everything else, and just took it to a whole nother new level of depth. And I knew that I had something. And and based on some of the findings from those insights and that map, it actually like showed me that if you knew certain things about somebody's consciousness, like specifically certain beliefs about their mind that existed at different levels in their mind, that you could actually predict these beliefs were so formative to their personality, their psychology, and who they were, that you could actually start to predict all these other things about them and have a really deep lens into all kinds of different patterns and their spiritual journey and their self-expression and how they were fundamentally psychologically wired. It was like hugely revealing and accurate to someone's behavior. And so this started to spin off all kinds of different things as it relates to these innovations. Um, so basically, like a whole psychology-based typing system came from this. Besides the map of the psyche, there's also a framework called the metapsychologies of disease, which is basically a map of the core psychologies that are behind the psychosomatic aspects of diseases, and special healing modalities that would take people into this level of depth, because I wasn't able to basically find anything else that would reliably take people through that and be able to actually help them meaningfully go through to these deeper levels. So anyways, I'll pause there, but all of these things kind of bloomed from this discovery. And now this has become, one of the core focuses of my work is bringing these bodies of work out to the world, because I believe that they have like major transformational impact for humanity. And the work that I've done with them so far, in the client work that I do and the work that we do with the institute, has been hugely impactful. And the feedback I've gotten is incredible. And so much data is pouring in from all of our experiences and continuing to verify and validate everything. And so yeah, that's where my thrust is now, is really bringing this out to the world. And my hope and intention is that it's able to massively accelerate and deepen like humanity's healing and personal and spiritual growth, because I think that's really the main use case of it. It can do a lot of different things in a lot of different areas, but I think that's what I believe is most important, and what we really need is a collective deepening of healing, and really stepping into some of the themes that we've been exploring here, which is like our fullest self-expression ultimately, and giving the genius of who we are to the world.
I have so many questions that I don't. Julian, I'm sure you do too. And
I do as well.
yeah, go ahead, and
I'll start high level, Justin,
Yeah.
and then we'll let Hope chime in and bring back Kipper into this conversation. But if you could just demystify two words for us here, Justin. So number one, you used the word internal work, inner work quite a bit, and I would just like to get a definition on that, what that means from your perspective. And then as a follow-up, you can just go kind of knock them out both together. Is flow consciousness. Like maybe describe in your own words what flow is, so we can relate to it even better.
Yeah, great questions. Fun questions, definition questions. Inner work. So to me, inner work is really the process of like letting go of suffering and distortion and moving into truth and bliss. And I know that's kind of vague, but it's totally clear to anybody that humanity struggles with mental health issues, that we all kind of have these deeper traumas, that we have these things, these experiences that are very difficult and challenging. We don't feel good. We have negative thoughts about ourselves that kind of that we all kind of know don't really add up, and likely limit us and cause a lot of self-doubt and self-sabotage and whatnot, and create all kinds of problems. And so to me, inner work is the process of like cleaning all of that up, right? And technically speaking, in my world, those like our psyche is essentially constructed of beliefs and emotions. And then there's higher order things that come from that, like thoughts and decisions and action stuff. But fundamentally, and through this research, our psyche is fundamentally constructed of like feelings, emotions, and beliefs. And so, to me, inner work on a very practical level is going in and discovering where we hold emotions and beliefs and so on and so forth that are ultimately not constructive or in some way causing us suffering and pain. And then doing different, there's many different ways to approach inner work and do it, but essentially correcting those, right? completing those unprocessed emotions, finding the limiting beliefs, seeing if they really serve us, and then figuring out what's actually true or what we would prefer to be true that's more constructive and healing for us. So inner work is that process. It's like of inner house cleaning, and then flow. There's flow states, and then what Jackie and I teach, which is flow consciousness. And flow consciousness is a way of life. It's a way to, the best way I could describe it succinctly is like the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which is non-doing doing. And to me, it's like the optimal state or way of being of consciousness that we can live in, that allows us to experience the most joy, the most connection, the most abundance, like anything that humans really value in life. I believe that flow consciousness is, and it's a set of principles and practices that it's one of, if not the best way to get there in my experience. I don't want to be pretentious. I think it's really great. I think it's a distillation of a lot of the core truths from a lot of different spiritual traditions. So it's not like any better than them, but it's a very practical and simplified way to access a lot of the wisdom from those traditions without having to get like a master's degree or spend an entire lifetime studying them.
Beautiful. The expanse of your work, Justin, is kind of mind-blowing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, as you endeavored to map human consciousness for collective healing, just even saying that is no small thing. I am curious to hear if during your research and your own personal growth and healing journey, if you fall into ideological paradigms, or how you keep your work really clean and clear of slipping into ideologies or paradigms, or how you manage that when you are mapping such a thing.
Yeah, that's really great. That's a good question. That's a really good question. I mean, my general approach, as it happened, by the way, I wasn't like intentionally trying to do this. This is just the way my journey unfolded. But I've spent considerable time on many different spiritual paths, trying many different practices, studying many different, disciplines and philosophies, and, and in different fields of research and whatnot. So I've just naturally kind of taken this holistic view. And so I have a really good handle on all of these different perspectives there. And my work has always tried to kind of go meta to that, because for them, so many of them overlap in so many different places, and so many of them also contradict each other. And I found that to be like kind of epistemically very interesting. It's like a lot of these traditions and practices and so on and so forth, they're getting like really good results for people, but they also contradict each other in a lot of ways, and they also share a lot of truths. And so a lot of my process leading up to even getting to the place to do this was trying to reconcile all of that. I'm like, okay, well, like, what's actually true? Like, how do I reconcile these conflicting things? And they obviously agree on this point. So I've always kind of taken like a secular meta perspective, and the discoveries that led to this were just, I wasn't even trying to do this. That's the thing. Like, I wasn't trying to do this. I'm just blown away by where it ended from this like fun little experiment that I took on. And for me, it was just like, whoa, like I was just, like Lewis and Clark in the depths of the psyche, just taking notes and drawing all the animals, and like noting what was there. And then it started to reveal itself into a map. So I think I was able to, just out of my innocence in some level, get around a lot of the confirmation bias that can, and the ideological problems that can happen when you're doing something like that. And the last thing I'll say too is that I'm always trying to reconcile everything. So when I think that this work stands on its own. It has its own, definition, and the discovery like speaks for itself. However, I'm very interested in how this can serve as like an elegant holding framework for other disciplines like neuroscience and other philosophies, and kind of reconcile them in a way that allows humanity to come up with like a unified approach to healing and consciousness, because that doesn't exist yet. Despite how it might seem, there's a huge amount of disagreement different philosophies of healing and consciousness, and it is by no means reconciled. And so I think we could all really benefit from that. Like there's a unified, more or less a unified perspective of like physics and different other fields of study. It doesn't really exist yet in like psychology, consciousness, the healing space. So I'm excited for that to potentially come out of this work.
I wonder, Kipper, if you had any questions for Justin, having just met him and hearing about his work. We'll unmute you. Justin, yeah, we can't hear you, Kipper. We'll let you work on that, and you could pop in.
He's an interview. We got to get him out.
Yeah, get out of that. I have so many questions for you, Justin. Your work, that's a mega lifelong mission, I'm guessing, and I'm wondering what drives you through this. Like it must be like a Russian doll of sorts, of like you revealing more and more, and there's just like there's endless work for you in your life. And I've met a few people who are engaged in this life's work, and I'm wondering what drives you from your, I don't know how old you are in your life right now, but what drives you to see this work through, and do you think you'll see it through for your whole life?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm making a public statement of accountability here, but yes, that's certainly my intention.
It's recorded.
And, it's recorded. I mean, at the most basic levels, the impact that this has had on me personally is extraordinary. And just to give you some context, like I was addicted to drugs out of emotional pain for, a good part of my life. I was in bad shape. I was in a really difficult spot. And I didn't know, at that point for 20 years, I had been struggling with, intense trauma and emotional problems. And what society was telling me was that you may be stuck with this forever. And here's a bunch of pills to help you cope with it. And my life was a shadow of what it is today. I was really, really struggling. And so to go from that to how I feel now, I mean, it's a miracle, and this is what got me there essentially. Even though I was doing inner work for many years before that too, it was still fundamentally based on some of the same principles that apply in a much more like precise and advanced and nuanced way with this work. And so it's completely and totally transformed my life. And there's some like beautiful, like when I facilitate this work and when I see other people transform like that, it's palpable. Like I feel better because as they're healing, it like uplifts the collective, like reality just gets better for everybody. So that to me is the most fulfilling thing. So it's not easy to find. It's not hard to find motivation for it, but I certainly do need help because this is a big thing and it's going to take a lot to bring it out to the world. So.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions, Justin. I mean, really super interesting. And I suppose I'd be interested to know from your perspective, talking about the self and the psyche, in terms of, I think you talked about, looking at it holistically. I mean, is there a belief that we're in a kind of, in this universe that is running perfectly and that we're getting our kind of conditioning and our system beliefs get in the way of seeing the perfection that just exists? Or is it not? I'm interested to know what your perspective on that is.
That I personally share that perspective, and yet a belief in that is not required for like a lot of these findings, right? So they kind of exist independently of that. And yet they also confirm that, or you could also spin them another way. I think that's part of the beauty of this, is that it doesn't really have a bias in and of itself. And I think that's kind of the nature of a lot of these big discoveries, right? Like if you look at quantum physics, there's different interpretations of it, right? Some believe that no, we live in a very deterministic reality, and this is like pilot wave interpretation of some of these early quantum physics experiences. And then there's the Copenhagen interpretation saying no, consciousness is primary and it's influencing everything. Nevertheless, when when you look at the phenomenon of what's happening, it is what it is, but we can spin it in a different way. And I think that applies here too. I personally believe, yes, that reality is paradoxically perfect, and it's also evolving and, in its own process. And, and I believe that what we experience in our psyche is a microcosm of that. I don't believe that we're fundamentally broken. I believe that we're fundamentally whole, but because of the way life unfolds at this time on the planet, we end up, with all these kinks in our hose. And, a big purpose that we all share in life is a rectification of those kinks, right? And that's the healing process, is like coming into the wholeness that we can be, that we are. And I just kind of like make an appeal to, whatever you want to say about enlightenment, like all the great spiritual teachers that are revered by humanity and have had massive impact on our culture and society, all posit, that like we are fundamentally love, we are fundamentally one, we are fundamentally, bliss. Experiences of ongoing states of bliss and consciousness are totally possible. Like we're not necessarily here to suffer, we're here to evolve and to grow and to become enlightened. And I think I just like, I think that this work and what I believe is parallels that, is that, we come into this reality, um, you know, for its growth potential for us, not for it necessarily to be perfect now, but for the opportunity that it affords us for growth and spiritual development.
I'd love to take it to kind of the next gear. I love the setup, hearing about both of your journeys, your bodies of work, how they interrelate, right? There's a few thoughts here. If we follow that idea of the pursuit of enlightenment and kind of popping out on the other side of suffering, I think we need to first kind of acknowledge that suffering is part of the human journey, right? And this world out there is maybe more insane than ever. And so the bottleneck becomes, can we actually become mature and sovereign to our emotions rather than being manipulated on an emotional basis, right? And so in one way or other, where I'm trying to steer the conversation to right now is, the world is changing, and the world is really changing faster than ever. You brought up quantum physics. That would be one element of change that hasn't existed 200 years ago, this understanding of it. Or we could take the internet, that's been about 20 years, maybe roughly a little longer, but pre the internet, the world has looked very different, and now we're suddenly interconnected. We're at the brink of AI, maybe even singularity. We've had all kinds of global phenomena to kind of shake people into fear over the last years, without digressing on this. And so I'm just really curious, Justin and Kipper, and Hope for you just as much. We know the world is changing. We know it's faster than ever. But we also know that there are people that are willing to break the rules, people that are completely kicking usual out of the window and say, let's go this extra mile, let's be resilient, let's thrive, let's lift each other up, right? And what do you guys think going into 2024, as we're publishing this work, what's required to actually be one of those people in 2024 and beyond?
Wow, it's a lovely question. Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel, when I hear Justin, I feel like I have a ridiculously simplistic view of it for myself, and I really respect you looking at this picture for more people. But I feel, I guess I'm really aware for me, and it can only that personal responsibility and personal truth and authenticity. I have this feeling that it's right here next to us, whatever we want to call it. But the concept of love, the concept of getting rid of fear, the concept of accepting and not having expectations, and accepting what is, because the truth is that we are going to have Ukraine and Russia fighting. I can talk about it with my friends, and we can sit in a room discussing and having kind of some deep thoughts about what's happening for them. But for me, at the moment, and Justin's got a different platform where he's doing something that has a greater reach, maybe. But it's just like, how do I show up on a day-to-day basis and create love, show love, be true to myself, and make a difference in that day? And I wonder, for me, if we all are able to do that, and that's goes into growing your own vegetables, or it goes into going and playing football with your kids, or I feel like for me, it's like it's nothing. It's not a head here. It's just right next to me, and I just need to kind of simplify. Now, I'm very much aware of being a white middle class 6-year-old man. I am very lucky to be able to have that kind of view. And if I was in Gaza at the moment, there wouldn't be time probably for any of this discussion, which is also another discussion. But I think I really want to be making my life more simple and seeing that I don't need to kind of attain something. I've got it right here. I've just got to get out of the way. So that's what I'm hoping to do in 2024.
The word you shared, Julian, talking about sovereignty, for me, that word has been coming up a lot with, I would say, a lot of the women that I'm working with, and also a lot of people working in education. I'm just going to bring it back to, we're talking about working with grown-ups, adults, mapping human consciousness, and where that takes me in my mind and my heart is, how can we get to younger humans? How can we start providing the expansive pathways or guidance, support, love for them to feel into their own sovereignty? And obviously, moving into 2024, what does that look like? It looks like a lot of things. It looks like, in my mind, speaking with people working directly with children, speaking with people who are parenting, how can we have young humans start to trust themselves, start to feel into their intuitive guides? You know, we see this in little toddlers. I'm a parent, Kipper's a parent. I don't know if you're a parent, Justin, but I think very quickly kids get this inner compass squished into this paradigm, into this box. And I think for me, in my personal work and what I'm experiencing is, how can we support our next generation to feel into their sovereignty? And that's not just in their education, but that's in the way that they express their authentic selves, how they show up, how they question everything, as you did, Justin. And I'm curious, Justin, for you, if you work with young people at all, if this is part of your, consciousness mapping. You're working with a lot of people who are healing, who are in transformation as grown-ups. Are you following that trail back to when they are younger, or thinking about, okay, what can we do differently moving forward? Or is this just part of the human existence, that we're all going to go through this, and that's highly unlikely, it's likely not going to happen? I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. I work with anybody who shows up and wants to do this work, because that's really all that's needed. I often end up working with entrepreneurs and people that are on their transformational path, because these are usually the people that want to do this kind of work. And so, but it's not particularly biased towards them. I have worked with younger people. I think the youngest that I've worked with is maybe like 13 or 14. Beyond that, like the younger you get, like the more you kind of need specialized skills and really to understand like how to interface with children. So I haven't worked with really young kids. But I also work with a lot of parents too that have children. And I think it's important, especially for them, to do this work, because they're the ones that are having the most significant impact on their children. Like our psyche and our the good things and the bad things, the things that need healing, the things that don't, are primarily conditioned by our relationship with our parents. And a lot of them happen on an implied level. It's not just what they're telling you, it's how they're being, how they're behaving, how they act when they're in challenging moments, how they act when things aren't challenging. So most of that imprinting is, kind of contextual and implied, and not necessarily like, hey, this is what reality is. It can happen that way too. So I think it's super important for parents to do this work, and really anybody. I mean, children learn about the world through anyone and everything that they encounter. So, besides working with children directly, like all of us personally embodying, our highest selves to the best of our capacity, like Kipper was saying, is important. But I also I also too just want to paint another picture too, which is that the difference between what we can consciously do and how we subconsciously are, because that's in the final analysis, that is the elephant in the room and the thing that most often gets neglected. And just because someone is not expressing something doesn't mean that it's not being felt or experienced by other people through implicit body language or different emotional energies that they're broadcasting and so on and so forth. And so I think that's really like the biggest lever we have to grow as a collective is us by all of us tending to those parts of ourselves that we're not aware of necessarily, or that we're aware of and have been neglected or are still, in distortion or in trauma or whatever it is. That's what I see. And I write a lot about this too, that, I don't think this is the only way that we can change the world, but I think it's one of the most, if not the most impactful ways. And that is by us essentially being the change that we want to see in the world, but not just I'm choosing to be love, but being like, I'm going to be love on every single level of my consciousness, because I can be love in one part and I can actually be holding on to unprocessed hate and unprocessed aggression on another part. And then it's going to actually limit how much love I can be. And it might show up in subtle ways and distort actually the love that I'm trying to be, and then start to have unintended consequences that kind of perpetuate the problematic reality that we're trying to move past. So I think it's really, being the change on all levels. If I could update Gandhi's saying, it would be like, be the change on every level of your being, and then you'll have the maximum positive impact.
Oh, I wish that I could pop you in front of as many young people as possible. I think it's essential to regulate our nervous systems to resonate and vibe with people who are making that kind of commitment, Justin. And to have that evidence in your field is something so profound. It even makes me emotional when I see someone committing on that kind of level and showing other people, not in their words, but in their energy. That is how we change the world. And I'm hopeful to see more of it in the future.
Well,
Rocking it.
we're full of hope here. Hope with you in the space, and also all four of us. And how could it not make us emotional?
Yeah.
Right, like we're human beings, right? We're intellectual minds and capacities, and we can think and we can ask questions, and asking questions might be a very, very, very important skill, increasingly so in this modern and changing world, in our capacity to ask really smart questions and to verify where the answer comes from. But we're also feeling social beings that are telepathically all connected to each other. And this might be a new word for some people, but I think most people kind of get it. Our telepathy comes from an emotional wavelength and our interconnection with each other. And so I think both of these skills are extremely important. Now I have a question again into the group here, which is, the world we all grew up in, all four of us, is fundamentally not around anymore. That was for all four of us before the internet existed, right? And we live in an increasingly more rapid world, in an increasingly more interconnected world. It has lots of positives, also has some dangerous potential, right? And we just went into this like sovereignty and emotional regulation, like truly fully feeling love on all the levels, even self-love for the part where I actually feel insecure, or even self-love for the part where I actually feel angry and I just don't know how to express it, because it's real for all of us that we have those sides. Now, on the internet though, I can pretend to be anyone I want to be, right? I can just make up a little avatar, or I could take your biometrics and create some CGI to make it look like I'm being you. And so it's extremely volatile and somewhat dangerous maybe too. My question is, how do you both navigate that, again, all three of you, how do you navigate that personally, and where do you see our society going? And maybe last hook in there, what skills and abilities will become increasingly more important to have in this day and age?
Well, I've got three children, 13, 17 and 20. And I sort of feel, and again, from a point of privilege, I suppose, I do feel that they're much more chilled about what this potential problem of the future is than I am. So everything that you said about, that everything's picking up, we're with this new technology, and I will be talking about the media outlets feeding false information. How do we trust? And yet my 20-year-old son, he doesn't really identify with any of it. It seems like he's working at a different speed, and that if anything, he is maybe even more instinctive than I've ever been, because he doesn't really know what the truth is and doesn't know what to believe, and he's being forced to kind of go, well, what? Okay, so there's so much information. So, even with the Israel-Gaza thing, without going into a political thing, he will talk about that without having an angle on it. And of course, we've got the BBC with an angle, or America with an angle, and then we will have a whole set of liberal press here that will have an angle. And he just will say, well, we don't know. We're in England. We've got no idea. Unless he has a tool to help that situation, he then carries on acting out of love and acting in the way that he's acting in his day-to-day life. And I think my other thing with the internet, which is kind of slightly what I love about the fact that we see everything, we see so much beauty, and so, again, it's rarely said, but the level of, from my point of view, musicianship, the level of beautiful photography, of beautiful physical acts, is incredible, because we can now see everyone in the world doing their piece of art, their piece of beauty. And so I think I choose to focus much more on that. And I celebrate people that are playing the guitar in a way that I could never have guessed anyone could play the guitar. And I'll see every week there'll be someone that's doing something that I'm going, I can't, as I'm sure we all get with our scrolling concept, you just see the most incredible things. And I guess I'm trying to revel in that and not be too, I'm lucky I've got balanced children, but it doesn't seem to be having a negative effect on most of the kids in Bali. And I might be living in a little kind of small echo chamber.
I noticed that. No, I really noticed that. Being in Bali this past year, I am paying attention to kids outsourcing their nervous system to this, not feeling their feelings, and going through, as soon as they start to feel a feeling, they like immediately go onto their screen. Not that grown-ups don't, but I'm seeing that young people, and especially in North America, a lot of them glued to their devices.
Right.
And there's this very different frequency I experienced in Bali. Is that's not the case as much. And I don't know if it's because the Balinese, with constant ceremony and this like pulse and vibe of natural cycles, that somehow it's just not as appealing. There is this other. I had all sorts of theories when I came back, but you are right. It's not the same, which gave me a lot of positive hope that when young people are in a setting where the overall frequency is full of natural cycles, that perhaps that will veer them away from using their devices, which are so appealing as sort of their outsourced nervous system.
And I wonder as well with you, Justin, about the idea of frequency, whether there's, raising consciousness for a few. Is there kind of a kind of scientific or a belief of that, I don't know what the figure is, but 10% of the population of the world raise their consciousness, it raises the consciousness of the world. I mean, is there an understanding of that as a truth?
I mean, that's, classically that's called the Maharishi effect, right, in scientific study, right? Because Maharishi Mahesh Yogi claimed that if 1% of the population meditated, then, it would have a measurable impact. And, I think the science there is pretty good. There's some controversy around it, but I think that the bigger conversation around that is like, what I always say is that who's ever more like strongly centered wins with consciousness. And so whoever's like unperturbable internally, or to whatever degree they're more than the other person, that person is going to have like the stronger center of gravity. And whoever has the stronger center of gravity in both as a leader or even not as a leader, but just, in our relationships, tends to suck people into that. And that's kind of like an energetic metaphysical interpretation. You can get really deep into like the technicalities of how that happens psychologically, but on a high level, like if someone is super deeply grounded in their truth and love and is not really shakable, people are going to they're either going to be deflected by that or they're going to get sucked into it, right? And we see this, especially with leaders, like musicians are a great example of this, right? Like these people on stage like become role models, right? They become, people want to be like them. They have like this cachet or this aura or whatever it is. So if that person becomes, awakened or does a lot of healing work, right? Like imagine if Taylor Swift starts talking about, all of the inner work, hundreds of millions of people are suddenly going to take interest in that. So I think that yes, consciousness does spread in a lot of different ways, and that's that's the nature of the game that we're playing, is just one by one, committing to being the best versions of ourselves, being loved, doing our inner work, whatever that means for us, our self-expression. And in doing that, we kind of become beacons, and then other people realize, oh, you're happier than maybe I am, or you have something that I don't have that I want. And so I get curious about that, or something different about you in my interactions with you. And like, it's like compelling at this kind of deep intuitive level. Right. So I think it's super powerful. And it is ultimately like one of my theories of change is that if we all if we all take care of and tend to our own gardens, then that's one of the most, if not the most powerful impacts we can have on the world. Because it's not that we become selfish, it's that we actually become more capable to help other people from a place of actual genuine centeredness or love or whatever it is. And so it's like first we tend our own garden so then we can be of maximum service. It's a dual movement.
Yeah. And some people have a great opportunity, don't they? Some people have a great opportunity. It's funny you say Taylor Swift. I've always had this theory of having Katy Perry, who I'm kind of 2 steps removed from. Katy Perry releasing an album of spiritual healing music, where the power it would have because of the power and the reach that she has.
Totally.
But I totally agree that. I did some work with a chap called Bobby Sager, who was a billionaire who went around the world with his family, taking them to stay in Buddhist retreats. And he organized, maybe 15 years ago now, he organized a concert in Gaza that had half Israeli, half Palestinian musicians. And he would do projects like this all over the world. And I always felt like I didn't have the reach that he would have. And I said, Bobby, here you are, going, and he would get scientists to fly out to out in the middle of nowhere Buddhist monastery and get the scientists to talk to the Buddhists and for them to come to some kind of agreement about what the spirituality and science means. And so he's doing this, and he said, Kipper, we can only do, I'm lucky I've been put on this world to have this kind of lifestyle, and I'm making the most of it. If you're at a traffic light and there's an old lady that needs to be helped across the road, help the old lady across the road, because that's there for you to do as your act of love. And I get the word that we use about showing up. If we can all show up in all of our lives in the best way we can with the opportunities that we're given, which it seems like, Julian, you are being a charismatic TV presenter, bringing intelligent people together to talk. Hope travels the world, bringing light and new ideas to everybody and helping people. It's like this is what we're all doing. We're showing up, and we just and hopefully that's other people get to see what it's like to show up.
Kipper, I mean, you're speaking from my soul right there, and I see all three of us like biting our lips because all three of us had something to say. But this is what it means to break the rules of business as usual. Because the business of usual that I grew up being born in '87 is you're programmed into what success looks like. You're programmed into what it should look like if you're successful as a young man. And so breaking out of the programming, that's step one. There's trauma and lots of trauma and healing and lots of healing to do for all of humanity, me included, because of simply the circumstances we get born into. And there's more that it's being perpetuated, which makes it even more difficult, right? But I think breaking the rules is fundamentally understanding and taking ourselves fully sovereign, but not too serious.
Yeah.
Right? About the impact we can make, the butterfly effect that we have no fucking idea of where it takes over. If you help that lady, and even that lady, doesn't matter, maybe she just was helped over the street, but someone else watched you, and that someone else is 6 years old, and suddenly that person is like, oh my God. This is where consciousness and love and God, whatever we want to call it, does the work in the background that none of us as individuals really understand, right? And so that's where it gets really, really juicy. And I think that's why it's so important to break the rules and break the mold and become fundamentally a different species that is capable to do things not through the individual achievement, but through individually tending the garden. I love that metaphor, Justin.
Yeah.
And collectively stepping out of the race to, become a different race.
I'm going to put a completely different hat on, and I'm normally hopeful, optimistic hope. I feel you. I hear you. The three of you. I want this vision to unfold. And I'm also feeling when we break the rules, or when breaking the rules is a schism in our life, it can lead to loneliness. And I connect with a lot of people who are breaking the rules. So it was really important for me to hear from you guys on the topic of when we break the rules, when we step outside and gather our gumption, our guts to do things differently, we can sometimes be alone and isolated, in solitude, disconnected, even if we have the internet. Like, how do you three, when you are breaking the rules of your life or business as usual, how do you deal with the feeling of loneliness, or is that something that comes to mind, or in your field at all?
I'll take a stab at that. Two answers. One like the practical answer, and one like um, you know how I also feel about it too. And the first is that you know it's kind of part of the path, and so you have to be ready for that. And so just understanding that you may lose friends, or you may be more isolated or tuned to a different wavelength than a lot of people. Like, okay, prepare for that and find your tribe. Pay attention when you meet, like, when you meet people on your wavelength, like, get to know them, be friends, and it's going to lead to you knowing more of those people. But I would also say too that, like, I don't fundamentally, my experience has been like that would have been the answer I gave you 5 or 6 years ago. But the answer that I would also give you now too is that we don't really truly feel lonely if we don't already feel lonely inside. If you feel me, like, I was also an only child like Kipper, and I spent a lot of time alone, and I was also had a lot of social anxiety. So I really know the space of loneliness. And I felt lonely inside too first, you know and so, if what I would say, on an inner work level, is that if there's an emotional charge associated with the loneliness, like, you should look into that too, right? And everybody should look into that, because there is spaces where we all feel abandoned and neglected, and so on and so forth. And I'm surrounded by people on this wavelength, really, truly surrounded by people on this wavelength. And that for me increased in proportion to me dealing with feeling all alone, which is one of my core wounds, by the way, is literally feeling all alone. So the more I like healed that, the more I started to be surrounded by other people, and not in like a airy fairy metaphysical way, but because I showed up differently, and I was able to get past, whatever self-expression blocks I had, and be myself more out in the world. And then other people found me more, and then there we go. Right. So, yeah, so I would just say, like, doing both of those things, like, to parallel my earlier comments, like, yeah, on the outer level, there's things you can do to find your tribe. And on the inner level, like, deal with your, inner loneliness and whatever else might be there on that wavelength.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
I'm glad I asked that
I don't think I don't suffer from loneliness. I could do with more time. I could be a bit more lonely, but and I sort of mean that in a real sense. But it does make me think. I have a brother that stopped me being an only child and took some attention away from me, which was great, at 14, and he suffers greatly. And I spoke to him yesterday, and I really he's been in my mind, because I don't know how to reach him, and I don't know how to help him. And he at the moment he's stuck in this other place, and so it's very interesting. Here we are talking as we are, and it's like, how do we? Here's somebody that I love, that I'm close to, and at the moment I don't have an answer on how to reach him. And I'm going to do a lot more reading around you, Justin. And as you were talking, I was thinking how it'd be great to have some alternate. He's tried lots of things, so whilst I feel blessed to not have had that anxiety socially or loneliness wise, I am aware of it and would like to kind of implement tools to help a loved one.
It's being real with you all. I like this. I'm going to also take a stab at that answer. I'm kind of halfway down the middle between the two of you there. I liked a lot of what you said, Justin. I think fundamentally how I deal with the feeling of being alone, like, yes, I have that feeling. And it's also one of my core wounds, that and rejection. Is making being alone a friend, meaning having a tool that makes me remember that when I'm alone, I'm actually not alone. And it's going to sound, pretty simple, but it is meditation. It is real meditation. It is not a guided meditation. It could be eyes open and just watching all of nature around me and breathing myself into that state where the thinking mind doesn't have a demand or control over me anymore. At that place of aloneness, I'm never alone again. I remember that I have a place in existence, and it's easy to say that, but when you really know that practice, there's that moment when it clicks. And different religions call it by different names, but we're all fundamentally linked and connected to source, to nature, to the gold frequency that this planet provides for us. And so when I'm alone, that's what I have to put in that work. But then also there's an interesting link to what Kipper said. There are moments when I'm not alone enough. And then I can also not feel that, I'll call it gold frequency again, that layer of nature that is actually like a wavelength or a frequency bandwidth that informs us tremendously to what we're here to do in this world. And when I'm lost in the social field, when I'm lost in other people's experience, when I'm lost in a big city, I can feel alone even though I'm extremely connected and surrounded by people. And so then it's the other side. Then I need to actually say, hey, so I kind of need to find a way to feel bored today. I kind of need to find a way to feel lonely today for a moment. And that's almost harder for me personally. I thrive off exchange with people. I thrive off the extroverted experience. Not always, but most of the time, 9 out of 10. And so realizing when that point is hit, that is like, oh, I haven't been bored in a while. I should just go and be bored for a bit.
Yeah.
And in our modern world with a cell phone, that's even harder, because when am I ever going to be bored? I mean, there's always something else to click at, right? And so that's my version of that today.
I just want to chime in too there, because you made a good point, Julian. And that, these things exist along a spectrum, right? So on one side you have aloneness, on the other side you have like compulsive socializing, right? Where we're actually afraid to be alone, right? And then so I think like what we're all triangulating is ultimately, in a healthy way, is that middle point where we like get whatever it is that we need, at the right time. Because if you're all alone all the time, or you're always around people, you run the risk of being out of balance, right? So I love that you spoke to that middle path.
I wanted to ask you, Justin, for people who are listening, if you have an exercise or a story that shares a way in to finding that connection with yourself, so that you can be alone, even when you're alone but together, when you're on a device with other people, if you have something that you share most often when it relates to this, just to give people a real tangible thing to hold on to from listening.
I mean, I'm a direct kind of guy. I'm really about efficiency, not in a rushed way, but like I spent so much time on my journey, like getting caught up without knowing it at the time in fluffy things that were ultimately not really serving me at the level that I needed to or wanted to be served. So now I'm like, okay, what's the most direct path? That's what I'm most interested in. And honestly, this is not a complete solution to loneliness, but something tangible that people can do is like be with your feelings, like and not just like feel them, not just like be with them, like, okay, there's this feeling over here and it feels, and it's lonely and I kind of don't like it, but I'm letting myself feel it a little bit because, like, someone told me I need to do that. But go into that feeling, really let yourself have that experience of loneliness. If you can really fully have it and surrender to it, it's only going to last for a couple minutes and you'll pop on the other side and you won't feel lonely in the same way, or you're going to feel a lot better. And this is so much of the healing journey, is just like completing these incomplete experiences that we had. They keep replaying over and over again. So, so I would encourage people to really just go right into it. Don't try and get around it. Don't try and like compensate with some other thing to like manage the feeling. Just like be with your loneliness and see if it's still there afterwards.
And
if
feel
you do,
your feelings. Justin,
yeah,
I love
feel,
that you said that.
yeah,
It seems like the most simple act to feel your feelings, and yet I feel it is one of the greatest human lessons, human capabilities, to have the capacity.
It's the graduation step into sovereignty, right? And it's a graduation step also both into the internal psyche as well as into the social field of relevance. Justin, you have more. Go for it.
Yeah, I'll just say one little extra thing, because like I really want people to have something. I don't want it to just be theoretical. Like the challenge with the feeling for people is actually surrendering to the feeling fully. Feeling the feeling, that information is out there and it's good advice, but you really have to like fully feel your feeling. That's how it will move through you. If there's still some part of you that's resisting it and like wants it to go away, or is like, trying to get past it, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You really have to surrender fully. Like, these wise mystics tell us, and when you do that, it might get intense for a minute, but you will eventually pop through, and you'll feel a lot better. So,
for a friend of mine, she teaches qigong, and she likes to talk about feelings as waves. And if we let the wave, as it's cresting over the beach, if we just let it come up really high, you're feeling the height of your feeling, probably the time you might want to back down and say, it's too much, fear is too much, too scary. So you stop the wave mid flow and it locks in your body. And when you're able to have the courage to let that wave crest and then fall over and crash, it does what it does in the shore, and it dissipates, sprinkles into the sand, and it's over, but you felt it. And I love that visual that it's never left my mind. Yeah.
Brilliant. I love that you asked this question, Hope. We're coming to the finishing point of this deep dive. We've been here for about an hour and a half, but I do want to check us out with one last question, and I hope we'll get two more really sweet answers. Kipper, we'll start with you, and the question goes for both of you. If handling difficult conversations was an Olympic sport, what would be your signature move?
That's a great question. Oh my goodness. Well, I think it would be either absolute honesty. I don't know how to do it, so I would really look to be honest and say I don't know, or it would be to make light and have fun and make a joke. But I think as I get older, I think I'm much more like to just kind of really try and understand and be as open and vulnerable as possible, and go, I really don't know how to deal with this. And also I'm aware of quite a lot of noise behind me.
Yeah, I was just about to say, Kipper, I mean, how good are you at receiving the same honesty as you are dishing it up? Because there's some background noise. I'll ask you to mute yourself and pass it over to Justin.
Well, I have two answers. I have, when you asked that question, I started laughing because, part of me went, avoid them, and that's how I used to operate, right? Like I had, it was very difficult for me to be in like really charged conversations. So I would just like avoid them. But now, obviously that's not healthy. And so now the key, and this is something that I get asked a lot, and I help people with, because we all have to have inevitably have difficult conversations. But the key in my experience is to just radically speak what you're feeling. If both people can do that and just be like, this is what I'm feeling right now, amazing things happen, and it can be very powerful and healing. And even if quite a bit about this, right? There's people that specialize in coaching people and having these kinds of conversations. Really, the essence of it in most cases, there's definitely things that you can do beyond just speaking your feelings to facilitate a really artful conversation. But if you don't know what you're doing and you only have one tool to rely on, that thing will get you so far. If you keep sticking to it, and if both people can do it, you can make miracles with anybody, even if they have no training in it. So
Here. I'll just slip in a really quick one, because I do spend a lot of time with people, having very direct conversations with them. I bet you do too, Julian. And getting them to also be very upfront about their feelings on how they want to express themselves. And one thing that I've learned is starting out by listening, really listening, but not just from your ears. There is this beautiful space called, I think Thich Nhat Hanh called it the interbeing, that when you're able to, in whatever conflict or tension or resistance, if you're able to take some breaths and really, before you start speaking, listen from not just your head, but also your heart. And I realize that's not always easy to, at first response, dip into that interbeing, but it's a good place to try and step into. And interestingly, when I've introduced this to kids, they find it fascinating. They love the idea of listening with other things, other parts of themselves other than their ears. Yeah,
I love that.
I wish that was taught at school.
Yeah, me too.
Well, this sure was fun for me. I hope it was fun for everyone tuning in, and for you as well, Hope, Justin, and Kipper. Again, thank you so much, Kipper and Justin, for making the time. Feel free to check out with any word, any sentence, any last share. So much from me for this one. I'm really grateful. This is the Alter Braintrust, and we're learning together how to break the rules and never return to business as usual, but to be real and to live from the heart.
Thank you, Kipper, Julian, Justin.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Keep breaking the rules.
Yeah, pleasure to be here with you all.
Thank
Much
you.
love. See you again. Bye.
Bye.